Hello, my name's Brandy and welcome to True Crime and Felines. Every Friday, we will sit down and talk about a true crime case or mystery, and one or more of my 14 felines will come and chill out in the background and judge, as cats do. So let's get started on this week's case. We are going to talk about Josef and Elizabeth Fritzl. Now, Josef Fritzl had imprisoned his daughter for 24 years in a cellar, and she ended up having 7 children where he was the father. So viewer discretion is definitely advised in this video. Josef Fritzl was born in 1935 in Austria. His parents were Maria and Josef Fritzl Sr. Josef grew up in the shadow of World War II. He told a story about how when he was 3 years old, he sat on the shoulders of his father and watched Adolf Hitler march through the streets of Austria. It was reported the only reason that Maria had a child is because she was accused of being barren. Now, the problem with proving that you're not barren is now you have a child and you need to take care of it. And it was stated that she wasn't a very good caregiver. It didn't help when Josef was 4 years old. Maria got fed up with his father's cheating ways and kicked his ass to the curb. Josef would say that he never saw his father again after that. Now, Maria was a very tough woman. She had to work and support both of them, which made things worse as a single mother. So she took a lot of her frustration out on Josef. In 1944, she let her opinions fly to the wrong authorities and was actually arrested and taken to a concentration camp. Josef would have been 9 years old at the time, and he was sent to an orphanage. Now, Maria only spent a couple months at the concentration camp and then was able to get released. But after being there, she became more eccentric and aggressive. The horrible things she probably saw and went through at that concentration camp probably did not help things. But Josef would say that Maria would beat him regularly until he was laying bloody on the floor. She isolated him and would not let him play any sports or play with other children. Now, beside this, he was going to school and he was getting good grades. Between the beatings at home and being scared and loving his mother at the same time and having no outlet for adolescent energy, Josef turned to more creepy hobbies like voyeurism. He started being a peeping Tom, and he would find teenage lovers and watch them or peep in the houses of the local neighborhood. This activity would continue into his young adulthood. Now, Josef ended up going to a trade school and becoming an engineer. He did really well in his jobs, and he ended up buying a lot of properties around Austria and renting them out. So he was pretty well off. When he was 21, he met Rosemary, and they got married in 1956. He was 21 and she was 17. Rosemary was said to be very quiet and submissive. After they were married, they moved into an apartment complex that Josef owned. Josef and Rosemary would go on to have 7 children. Now, Josef continued his voyeurism activities, but it was not enough for him, and he escalated like most criminals do. He ended up breaking into a home of a nurse whose husband was not home at the time and raped her at knife point. She did inform the police, and he was arrested. He was also a suspect of exposing himself to another woman, and yet that same year, he was a suspect of attacking another woman. He was convicted of the rape of the nurse, and he ended up spending 18 months in jail. Now, during this time in jail, he knew he had a problem. He would state that he was born to rape, and it all stemmed from his childhood and the way his mother treated him. It was reported that he knew he wouldn't be able to stop, so while he was serving time in prison, that's when he hatched the plan to build a prison underground. And then that's where he could trap a prisoner to act out his evil side so he could be normal up top. Oof. Once Josef got out of prison, Rosemary forgave him and he was able to come back home. Now, remember Mama Maria? Well, apparently she had moved into the apartment complex as well. Josef would admit later that he went up there and actually bricked up the window so she had no light and treated her like a prisoner. Now, he did this until her actual death in 1980. Nobody knows how long she was a prisoner up there, but some papers reported that at the time it could have been 20 years. He said he did it because he was paying her back for the terrible treatment he got as a child, and that she never hugged or kissed him or gave him any affection whatsoever. And that's all he wanted from her. Now, a little bit about Elizabeth. She was born in 1966, and she was the fourth of the 7 children. Elizabeth would say that Josef started abusing her at age 11. Not only physical abuse, but that's when the sexual abuse started as well. He would leave pornographic magazines under her pillow and in her room, and he would start masturbating in front of her. Now, Elizabeth was 17 in 1984. Now, she couldn't take all the things going on at home anymore, so she decided to run away with a friend. She was gone a couple weeks until the authorities found her and drug her back home to a very angry Josef. In mid-summer of 1984, she would have been 18 years old. She actually got a job offer in a nearby town. She told her father, "I got a job and I am out of here." He did not like what he heard, so that's when he decided to put his plan into action. Josef started building his basement as early as the 70s. He got the permit to do that back then, but it took years to actually dig everything out and build it. And he made the cellar, the prison portion of the cellar, behind false walls where it looks like a shelving unit was there, and if you slide the shelving unit, a door would be there. So when the inspectors come to do the final inspection of the basement, they had no idea they had this prison on the other side of the wall. In August of 1984, that's when his prison was almost complete. All he needed was one final door installed. So he asked his daughter Elizabeth to carry the door down to the basement. She actually held it while he put it on the frame. And then when they were done, he put a towel soaked in chloroform on her face and she passed out. When she awoke, she was in her prison. She had no idea she would be there for the next 24 years. After Elizabeth went missing, Rosemary became concerned and she called the authorities and filed a missing persons report. Josef forced Elizabeth to write a letter to her mother to say that she was done with the family, she ran away, joined a religious sect, a cult, and if they tried to find her, she would leave the country. The problem with that is because she already ran away, it was very easily believed, and everybody bought it, including the authorities, and her case ended up being closed, and everyone stopped looking for her. Elizabeth said the first couple months that she was imprisoned, she was chained with her arms behind her back on a bed, and she wasn't able to really get off the bed at all. After that, Josef affixed a chain to her waist and put her on a 5-foot dog leash, so she was able to move about more. After about a year of the chain on her waist, he removed it because it was hindering his sexual activity with her. The cellar itself was disgusting. It was damp, it had raw sewage a lot of the times, it was rat infested. The summer was stifling heat, and Elizabeth would say that was the worst time of the year, and in the winters it was bitterly cold. After the chains were removed, Josef would threaten Elizabeth and tell her that if she touched the door, it would electrify her, and there was a booby trap that when triggered, it would gas the entire cellar and kill her. She stated for the first couple years, Josef barely uttered a word to her. He would come down, assault her, and just leave. He would often go days without giving her food, or he'd turn off the power to the basement so she was in complete darkness, just to punish her. Elizabeth stated that Josef brought down a television, radio, and a VHS video cassette. He would bring down pornographic videos and force her to reenact them with him. And once the children started coming, often this abuse happened in front of the children. She said other times he would bring down sex toys, and some of them were way oversized, and he would abuse her with them, sometimes causing internal injuries. Elizabeth realized she was pregnant for the first time in 1986. She would end up miscarrying. A few years later, she would find herself pregnant again. So in 1989, her first daughter, Kirsten, was born. He brought down books from the 1960s on childbirth, some towels, a dirty pair of scissors, and some aspirin, for the pain. Thanks, Dad. From then on, 6 more children would be born. In 1990, her first boy, Stefan, was born. And in 1992, another girl, Lisa, was born. And for some reason, Josef decided that all these kids could not stay in this basement, especially in this small 390-foot square area. So when Lisa was 9 months old, he took her upstairs with a note that he made Elizabeth write, saying that the cult would not allow children and that she pretty much dropped the baby on their doorstep, asking her parents to take care of them. In 1994, another girl, Monica, was born, and Josef decided that she would go upstairs as well. So at 10 months, the baby was just left on their doorstep. There was no note this time, but a couple days later, Rosemary would report to police that she received a call from Elizabeth. Rosemary reports that she was surprised that Elizabeth called because they had changed their number and it was unlisted. Now we're in 1994 and Elizabeth has been in her prison for 10 years. She's sharing the cellar with Kirsten and Stefan, who are 5 and 4 years old. Elizabeth pleaded with her father if they could expand the basement. It was getting a little cramped, and her father agreed, and he pretty much said, "Have at it." Elizabeth and her children would dig with their hands to expand the basement. The basement would be expanded from 390 square feet to 590 square feet. So not a huge expansion, but now there were rooms. And Elizabeth stated now when she was assaulted, she would not be insulted in front of her children. In 1997, Elizabeth found herself pregnant again, but this time it was with twins. Alexander and Michael came into this world. Now, unfortunately, Michael was having breathing problems. Elizabeth begged Josef to get him help, but Josef refused. Unfortunately, Michael ended up dying in Elizabeth's arms 66 hours after his birth. As for Alexander, the surviving twin, Josef again took him upstairs at 10 months and left him on the doorstep with a note again. What was remaining is what to do with Michael. So Josef, being the thinker he is, Josef ended up burning Michael's body in the furnace. In 2002, Elizabeth became pregnant for the last time. She gave birth to Felix. Felix would end up staying in the basement and not being brought up top because Josef felt that his wife just couldn't take on another child. Oh, what a sweet man he is. So the years would drag on for them, and their only link to the outside world was a television and a radio. Josef had told his tenants and his family that they were forbidden to go in the basement. His tenants weren't even allowed to go into the courtyard where the basement door was located. And he was such an overbearing and scary man, everybody listened. He was pretty confident nobody was going to find out his secret of his cellar family. He was so confident, in fact, that he regularly went on vacation. And one time he went vacation to Thailand for 3 weeks. And he is caught buying a dress that is obviously way too small for his wife. And when his friend asked him about it, he just said, "It's for my girlfriend. Don't tell Rosemary."
Holidays, like this sleazy sex tour of Thailand. Who looked after the family in the basement? Who looked after the prisoners downstairs in the basement? How did he get away with that?
Nobody looked after them because he was a very good logistic thinker, and he planned everything. He had some rooms where they could store milk and bread and all the things you need, even vegetables. And yes, they were fine for 3 weeks. That was okay.
What is with the Speedo? Like, I know it was the 80s, but come on. Ugh. Don't you just want to punch that face? So now we're going to jump to 2008. Elizabeth had been in the cellar for 24 years, and she's now 42 years old. Kirsten is 19, Stefan is 18, and Felix is 5. Now, the years of living in the cellar was not good for any of them, especially the children. Kirsten became very ill, and she ended up losing consciousness. Elizabeth begged Josef to please help Kirsten. And finally, Josef agreed to take her to the hospital. Now, honestly, I think he learned his lesson with Michael maybe, and maybe a 19-year-old body would be a little bit harder to get rid of. So he made Elizabeth carry her own daughter up the stairs. And that was the first time Elizabeth actually saw the sunshine in 24 years and felt the air on her face. But as soon as she put Elizabeth down, Josef forced her back into her dungeon. Josef called an ambulance and stated his granddaughter just showed up at their doorstep and she was sick. So Kirsten was taken to the hospital. Once she got to the hospital, the staff was very concerned. Now remember, Kirsten had never been outside and has never seen the sun, so her skin was ashen and thin, and you could see right through it. She had rotten teeth from the years of poor hygiene and eating cheap processed food that Josef would bring down to the cellar. So they were more concerned that this girl had been neglected and abused her entire life. As they talked to Josef, Josef just shared, I don't know, her mother's in a cult, her mother's in a cult, her mother's in a cult, she ran away. Well, authorities started kind of seeing through everything, and his lies started to collapse on him. So the hospital staff alerted the authorities, and the authorities came in and started asking more questions. They ended up opening Elizabeth's missing person case back up. Josef panicked, but his lies started to collapse on him. The next couple days, the hospital staff and the authorities made a plea on television for Elizabeth to please come forward so they could help her daughter. They determined that she was dying of kidney failure, and they had to put Kirsten in a medically induced coma to try to stabilize her. Elizabeth, watching all of this on her little television in the cellar, begged Josef to let her go out so her daughter could be saved. Josef agreed. So, for the first time, Elizabeth and her 2 remaining children were brought upstairs into the outside. Now, it was nighttime, so what Josef did is took the 2 children and gave them to Rosemary with the explanation that the religious cult had let go of Elizabeth and let her come save her daughter. And then they headed off to the hospital. Now, the authorities were waiting for them, and Elizabeth and Josef were actually taken into custody right on the hospital grounds, and they were taken right to the police station. Elizabeth was separated from her father and put in a room. And at first, Elizabeth didn't want to talk. She would just lower her head and say, "You wouldn't believe me anyway." Finally, as authorities pushed her and put into her head that maybe she was the victim all along, she said, "If you promise me I never have to see my father again, I will tell you everything." So for the next 2 hours, she let things spill, and Josef was arrested. Josef's trial started on March 16th, 2009. At first, Josef pleaded not guilty to all crimes, including incest, rape, coercion, enslavement, manslaughter, due to Michael. The papers around the time started calling Josef the monster of Austria, and Josef's lawyer actually tried to sway the public to say he's not a monster, because at Christmas he smuggled a tree down to Elizabeth and her children and gave them gifts. Oh, it's okay, everybody. It's okay. We can ignore all the rape and enslavement and 24 years of torture because he brought in a tree and gave them gifts. That everybody can go home. As the trial went on and they talked about the terrible conditions of the basement, Josef would say, well, I gave them a canary and the canary lived, so the basement couldn't have been that bad. Okay. He would also say that he did not rape his daughter, that it was consensual because he gave her a choice. You can either have sex with me or you can starve. So Josef was sent to a psychiatrist to see if he was competent to stand trial. He also was stating later to the psychiatrist that he knew he was hurting his daughter and that she did not want to do the things that he wanted to do to her, but the urge to finally taste the forbidden fruit was too strong. Ugh. Elizabeth's testimony was actually taped and then played for the courtroom. And the day that they did that, Elizabeth, in disguise, snuck in the courtroom and sat in the guest area. Josef spotted her and recognized her. And later the lawyer would say that all it took was some eye contact, and then something happened with Josef. The next morning, he changed his plea to guilty on all charges. The trial wrapped up in 4 days, and he was charged with life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. So in 2024, he could get out on parole. How is that fair? And Josef now is residing in a part of the prison that's for criminally insane. He has changed his name to try to get away from the monster label, but yet he boasts to other prisoners that he's known all around the world and that he says he's looking forward to getting out soon so he could go fishing. Now, the latest reports is of 2019. He's suffering from dementia and his health is declining. So let's just hope he dies in prison. As for the rest of the family and the aftermath of all this, Rosemary divorced Josef a few days after the trial was over. Elizabeth and Rosemary had been working on their relationship for years, and the first couple years, Elizabeth could not accept that her mother did not know or even suspect anything, that she just blindly believed her father and never tried, never wondered, even Elizabeth knowing their new unlisted number. And knowing Grandma was locked up in the attic. Come on. Elizabeth lives with her children in an undisclosed location and under assumed names. She is not about the spotlight. She doesn't want anything to do with it. She was actually approached and offered $5 million for a book movie interview deal, and she declined, saying, I just want to be left alone. So her and her children now live in this village, and it's fiercely protected by cameras and security guards. And the latest report is that she's married. Go girl. The family's still dealing with some post-traumatic stress with therapy. Stefan, who was the first boy that was born, he ended up being 5'8" and he has walking problems because growing up in that cellar, which the ceilings were only about 5 foot and some inches, he had to stoop, otherwise doing fine. Felix, who was the youngest at 5 years old, is doing fine, and they say he pretty much doesn't remember anything, so that's a good thing for him to recover. Kirsten and Stefan are still dealing with some post-traumatic stress. They don't like closed doors, and they don't like darkness. So where they live is always a light on and no closed doors. As for the house where the family stayed, the basement was filled up with 200 pounds of concrete in 2013. The neighborhood was canvassed and they thought about tearing the building down, but the neighborhood decided since the cellar had been sealed up and it wouldn't become this weird tourist attraction anymore, that the place could be sold. So it was put on the market in 2013, but no viable offers came forward. Finally, a bar owner bought it in 2016 and turned it into a place for his trainees to stay. The place has been painted and he wants to move on from its past. So guys, that is this week's case. Let me know what you thought about it. Again, I will be here every Friday with a new case and felines. He must have been bored by my story. I'll do better. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like true crime and felines. Have an meowsing week. See what I did there? And we will see you next time. Bye!